Welcome back to the Gut 360 podcast. I'm your host, Ellie Breacher, a registered nutritionist on a mission to empower you to transform the health of your mind, body, and gut. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Megan Rossi to dive into one of the most talked about wellness topics right now and my favorite area to discuss, gut health. But more importantly, what people are still getting wrong. We're talking probiotics, when they may actually help, when they might not, the supplements that are genuinely worth knowing about, the gut health trends causing more confusion than clarity, and the everyday mistakes that could be keeping symptoms like bloating going without you realizing. We're also going to get into the overlap between gut symptoms and women's health, including why so many women with endometriosis also experience IBS-type symptoms, and what a more evidence-based approach can look like. So grab a matcha and head out for a walk because this episode is going to be incredibly insightful, practical, and full of takeaways you'll want to come back to. My guest, Dr. Megan Rossi, is the founder of the Gut Health Doctor and one of the most influential gut health specialists internationally, and a leading research fellow at King's College London. She's a registered dietitian and nutritionist with a PhD in probiotics, the founder of Bio and Me and Smart Strains, and the author of multiple Sunday Times best-selling books, including her most recent Eat More, Live Well. Welcome, Dr. Megan, to the Gut 360 podcast.
Thanks for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
I'm delighted to have you on here. I think gut health has become such a huge focus in the wellness industry over the past few years. And I'm really happy about that, but I also feel like there is so much confusion. Do you think people are genuinely more informed now or actually more confused than ever?
Yeah, like you said, Ali, it's really exciting that the world is like really taken on to the scientific element that we have these trillions of bacteria in our gut, which make up, our gut health, so to speak. And people are wanting to really enhance that. But like you said, there's so many myths. So in clinic, I see it all the time where people really intelligent, like high-flying CEOs come to me, thinking they're doing all this good for their gut. But actually what the things they're doing in terms of sort of supplements and diets actually is literally the opposite of what we're learning in the lab at King's. So there is a whole lot of confusion out there still, as you said.
There really is. What are some of the most common gut health mistakes that you see people making right now, whether that's in clinic or just from the conversations that you're having online?
Yeah, I think supplements is a huge one, right?
Mhm.
And I think this whole area of probiotics really got sold to us in a very misleading way, right? So I actually do my PhD in probiotics. So I'm very passionate about the science. And when we think about probiotics, which are the live bacteria, right? So it's different from prebiotics, even though literally just one letter difference. People get them confused all the time. So prebiotics is a fertilizer. Probiotics are those live microbes, right? Shown to have health benefits. So when it comes to probiotics, each different type of bacteria, which scientifically we call a strain, does something different in the body. So just like if someone had, iron deficiency, I would never go and say, well, take a vitamin D supplement. I would say, take the iron supplement, right? Because
Yeah.
that's what you need. The same goes with probiotics. We need to be saying you need to take this strain for this effect. This kind of concept of just, taking this generalized probiotics with all these different strains in it, like there is absolutely no scientific evidence that supports that. There's never been a clinical trial to show that taking all different strains mixed together, in fact, some of them can actually compete, is going to improve your general gut health, right? For your general gut health, it's all the principles we talk about, Ali, online, things like the plant diversity, fermented foods, all that sort of stuff. But that's not to say probiotics can't be effective, right? Obviously, I did my PhD in it. There is a lot of clinical research that when probiotics used the right way, they can be hugely efficacious and be, life-changing for some people. But we just need to get much more specific and use the science in the way that, the clinical trials have shown us, and then get very specific of
Yeah,
exactly which strains.
100%. I'd love to dive deeper into that. Can you tell us where do we actually have the strongest evidence for probiotic use? Which conditions would stand out most from the research?
Yeah, that's a really good question, right? Because there's so many, avenues for gut health. There's gut health linked to our hormones, there's gut health linked to our mental health. So, it could be understood that, oh, I should just take a probiotic. It's going to improve all these areas, my skin and everything. So, when I was working, founding the gut health clinic, I was seeing people come in with all different, issues. Some of them I knew there was really good scientific evidence for, things like if you're struggling with your immune system, right? Things like you're always the one that gets sick and stuff like that. And we know that 70% of your immune system lives in the gut. So, I was very aware that there's a Cochrane review. This, for those who aren't aware, that's where you have this like whole body of evidence, these independent researchers look at the data, and they've said that taking specific types of strains can actually significantly reduce your risk of things like, cold and flu. So I knew that. And so I went into the detail and I was like, okay, it's these specific strains, right, that have shown to have these health benefits. So the Cochrane review actually showed that taking specific types of bacteria could significantly reduce your duration and severity of symptoms of cold and flu, right? So I knew that existed. So I'd say to patients, okay, we'll take the LGG bacteria with BB12 because that's what the clinical trials have shown. And they're like, great, where do I find that brand? And I'm like, literally mind-blowing that we have all this scientific research. Those formulations literally didn't exist on the shelves. I'm like, this is, crazy. So that's when I set up Smart Strains. So I was like, okay, great. I'm going to have to develop something, right? So I looked and did a really strong deep dive into, okay, what areas has the strongest scientific evidence for specific strains? So my criteria was threefold, right? So the first level, I wanted to make sure that there was either a clinical guideline, so, these health authorities which say, yes, you should take your probiotic for this specific indication, or there was a systematic review. And again, for those who don't know too much about science, systematic reviews is when they pull together all the individual studies to look at what the whole body of evidence has about that particular topic. Like, should you take a probiotic for your mental health, that sort of thing. So if that was my first criteria. So I would go tick, okay, great, it met that criteria. The second one was, is there actually like a public need, or is there a better therapy that can, improve symptoms? So things like IBS, we know that a low FODMAP diet can be super therapeutic, right? So I was like, okay, I had to make sure that there was a gap in terms of helping people. If something was going to improve symptoms by like 5%, what's the point of, giving someone that therapy, right? So that was the second criteria. And then the third criteria is there had to be at least 2 randomized controlled trials, placebo controlled, right? So there had to be really robust actual clinical studies showing that those lactobacillus formulations existed. So I went through all of the topics and it boiled down to 4 that met that criteria. And that is for your immune system. So things like cold and flu, for kind of fussy babies, which is very relevant to me with my little girl Adeline, who's on that specific formulation, for when you're on antibiotics and if you struggle with vaginal infections. So those are the 4 areas where we have really good scientific evidence for specific formulations, where we know in these placebo-controlled trials they can have a much more powerful effect compared to the placebo, that fake intervention. And so that's why I started with Smart Strains, those 4 different areas.
That's amazing. I'm currently taking your immune supportive one, the Smart Strains that you sent over, and I feel like I've always had a bit of a tricky immune system. I have Crohn's, which is autoimmune. So, of course, I get run down and I feel like I used to pick up every cough and cold. So I've become much more diligent with supporting my immune health and more so supporting my gut health, which, as you said, that's where 70% of our immune system is. I love how much research and scientific evidence has gone into the formulation of these 4 strains that you've got. So beyond probiotics, would you say there are any supplements that are genuinely useful for supporting gut health? Any that you feel are maybe oversold?
Yeah, so I think in terms of other supplements that specifically are focusing on gut health, like, speaking about autoimmune conditions like, inflammatory bowel disease, there's actually some interesting research around curcumin, so the active component of turmeric, for ulcerative colitis, another type of inflammatory bowel disease, where actually they showed that having that with some of the drug therapies actually had a much greater effect on things like reducing inflammation. So I think that's a really interesting area.
Yeah.
Of research there. Then other ones, things, quite obvious ones, but things like omega-3, right? So we know omega-3 is so important for our mental health, but actually the studies suggest it also is really important for our gut health. So a lot of people I see in clinic aren't having their, 140 grams of oily fish a week for whatever reason. Maybe it's they don't like the taste, maybe it's, ethical reasons, religious reasons. And for those people, I strongly recommend them thinking about an omega-3 supplement with EPA and DHA in it. And I think that's a real trick, getting even amounts of them, because you see some supplements where it just has one type of the omega-3, and actually we're kind of after both. because they do slightly different things in the body. So I
Yeah.
think that's a really important one.
Omega-3 is a great one. Also in the fertility space, I recently did a qualification in fertility nutrition and pregnancy as well. Omega-3 can be so helpful there too. And I know also, just speaking of women's health, many women listening are going to have both gut symptoms and hormonal symptoms happening together. And we know that women with endometriosis are actually significantly more likely to experience IBS-type symptoms. So from a nutrition perspective, how do you approach that overlap?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and I'm happy you spoke about endometriosis because it's so common, and for years I think loads of women are being dismissed about it. But thanks to social media, I think that awareness is really rising. And my husband's a NHS GP, and I was talking to him about kind of the misdiagnosis, and he said, to be honest, it just is a really hard condition to diagnose, which is why I think a lot of people, historically have just been, put into the IBS category of like, oh, your gut symptoms and gynae, it's probably just the IBS thing, when actually, they do have endometriosis. But there is, as you said, that huge overlap. And there was recently actually a clinical trial which showed that women with endometriosis who went on a low FODMAP diet actually had a significant improvement in some of not just things like their bloating, but some of their endo symptoms as well. So some of the gynae pain, which I think is a really interesting one. So for those who don't know about low FODMAP diet, so it's a medical diet, and actually it's not directly good for your gut microbiome, because the functionality of it essentially is reducing these prebiotics that we spoke about, right? So not the probiotics or lactobacteria, the prebiotics. So things like your inulin and galacto-oligosaccharides and things like your chickpeas and your butter beans, because we know they're so good for the gut. But if you've got a sensitive gut lining, which often is what we see in people with endometriosis, got all these kind of nerves in the gut, which are like wild, loose wires, I like to think of them. Then you add prebiotics, the microbes love it, they produce gas just, naturally, and that activates those wires, and actually that can trigger worse symptoms. So the purpose of low FODMAP diet is to give that gut a little bit of a rest. And then we systematically reintroduce those different FODMAPs into the diet to build tolerance. So actually, if you are struggling with endometriosis and you're having really bad symptoms, then thinking about, speaking to a specialist about, trialing a low FODMAP diet. Or on the Gut Health Doctor website, I've got a FODMAP light approach, because appreciate, seeing a specialist, to help with the low FODMAP diet is not always accessible. So there's a more gentle approach, which has got a much less risk attached to it, because any restrictive diet, Ellie, as you know, there's consequences of that if you go too restrictive.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know, I sometimes get clients who come to me and they say, so I've been following the low FODMAP diet for 6 years. And I'm like, whoa, who told you to follow the low FODMAP diet for 6 years? It's meant to be a short term thing before you start introducing foods and figuring out what's triggering you, if anything, and going from there. But if someone is listening and feels bloated most days, even when they think they're eating well, what are they most likely getting wrong?
Yeah, I mean, bloating is a huge topic, right? I think it's what was the stat? I think it's about 30% of people experience it on a, ongoing basis, quite burdensome bloating, right?
Yeah.
And there's over 20 different triggers I commonly see for bloating. So despite, if you and I both struggle with bloating, the chances are our triggers would actually be different. And that's why it's so difficult to be like, it's this or it's that, because everyone's got their own unique kind of, set of triggers.
Can you list some of them? You don't need to list all 20. Just
Yeah, yeah,
throw a
yeah.
few out at me.
Yeah, of course, of course. So I think having excessive fructose, having sugar alcohols, even found in things like chewing gum, so sorbitol and xylitol. Really high fat foods can trigger bloating in some people. Excess fiber, fiber dumping, having loads all at once and not having a trained gut microbiome. Not having enough fiber for some people. Spicy food, how fast you eat, wearing tight clothes. So actually got a bloating masterclass literally on those different ones, on the 20, and delving into the different strategies. But I think probably if you pinned me down, Ali, and said you have to pick the top ones, I would say at the moment, because fiber maxing is such a huge thing, right? And I think we both agree that fiber is obviously beneficial. It's fertilizer for our gut microbiome. So yes, we want people to have loads of fiber. But this concept of fiber maxing in an untrained gut can trigger bloating, because The thing about fiber is human cells can't digest it. So when we think about our gut, it's this 9-meter long tube, right? Most of our nutrients, so things like our proteins, our fats, and most carbs are absorbed high up, right? So it gets from our gut into the blood system to feed our brain, skin, all that sort of stuff. But when it comes to fiber, human cells can't digest it, which means essentially it's too big to get from our gut into our blood system high up. That's where the bacteria come in. Most of them live in that last 1.5 meters of our gut, right? They uniquely have the enzymes to break down that fiber. And when they do that, they produce all those amazing, beneficial chemicals, as well as that little bit of gas, as I mentioned, just an inert byproduct that they naturally produce. So if your gut is not trained to handle, that production of gas, and so you go from a little fiber to loads of fiber, it's kind of like dumping so much food into the bacteria's realm, they binge eat and they go nuts. And for a lot of people, that can trigger bloating. So, going slow and steady with the fiber and training your gut like you would any muscle at the gym over a space of, 3 or so months is the best way to go from, maybe I think the average in UK is 18 grams of fiber up to your 30 plus grams of fiber. I would say it needs to be, about a 3-month process for a lot of people's guts.
Yeah, I agree. Just going slow and gradual is really helpful. And I think another thing that's helpful is instead of counting grams of fiber to try and get up to your 30 grams a day, I like that you often share about plant points and the 6 categories of different plant points. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so I mean, there was this really cool study back published from the US. I think it was back in 2016, and it was the first one to really draw our attention to this fact that each different plant actually has got, hundreds of different plant chemicals which feed different gut bacteria. So what they showed is if you just ate the same 10 plants on repeat, you were less likely to have good gut health, which was used as so bacteria diversity was used as a marker of good gut health essentially, than people who had at least 30 different types of plants. So that research then it kind of got me thinking, Clegg, well, how can we make gut health fun? I know people like gamifying stuff. So I started to, create the plant point system, and we've used it on BioMe. And I love that everyone, now uses it in the food industry because it gets people thinking apart from, counting calories, now more positively counting your plant points. And like I said, gamify it with friends and family. How many plants have you had today? All that sort of stuff. And ultimately, it comes down to that fact that each different bacteria likes a different plant. So even though, blueberries are really beneficial, if you just ate blueberries, then you would really miss out on the bacteria that likes your quinoa and your oats, and you would narrow down the skill set, and therefore they wouldn't be able to do all the things that we now know, like help regulate things like estrogen and talk to our brain and all that sort of stuff. So trying to get in as many different types of plants. And that's when kind of the next level of the Super Six. I love naming, kind of gamifying again, getting people to think, something that's catchy so they'll remember it, right? So 3 o'clock every day, I say to my clients, think, have I had something from the Super Six? And if I haven't, you need to then get something from that plant category. So essentially, there are these 6 different plant-based categories. Ali, you obviously know them like the back of your hand, but we've got our whole grains, so things like our oats and our quinoa, barley. We've got our fruit, we've got our veg, you've got our legumes, chickpea, butter beans, those sorts of things. You've got your herbs and your spices and your nuts and your seeds. So each different category, again, provides our bacteria with different fertilizers. And that's why we see these trends of people going on ketogenic diets where they cut out things like your legume group and your grain group. Actually, the scientific studies have shown they actually reduce down their bacteria diversity, which essentially means they're more likely to have gut issues and, high risk of these chronic conditions, because the more bacteria you've got, the more skills, the more things they can do to protect you is kind of the way I like to think about it. So yeah, it's really, important, I guess, as a takeaway for people to think, what are the Super Six? Have I had them every day? And if I haven't, whatever you're having for dinner tonight, add a can of mixed beans, or, go get a handful of walnuts or almonds at the end of the day. So you're ticking each of those different categories off.
Definitely. I love those ideas. One thing I've been doing a lot is making dips at home, but not just your classic hummus, which I do make a lot, but sometimes I'll do it with butter beans or white beans, and I'll add sometimes different vegetables like a roasted red pepper or,
Oh, yum.
the flesh of a baked sweet potato. Just a really nice way to get in even more plant points. We know we should be consuming fermented foods for our gut health, but have you tried kimchi or sauerkraut? This episode is sponsored by The Cultured Collective, whose kimchi and sauerkrauts are naturally fermented, unpasteurized, and tested for live cultures, as well as being a source of fiber. They've won awards for their flavor, so I'm not the only one who thinks they taste amazing. It's really easy to add a scoop of these real live foods to all kinds of meals. I love adding kimchi to the side of my eggs and topping avocado toast with sauerkraut. They're offering listeners of the Gut 360 podcast a huge 50% off their kimchi and sauerkraut, so head to the show notes to find out more. This episode is sponsored by IM8. As a nutritionist, I'm always talking about the importance of a 360-degree approach to health, supporting your gut, energy, immune system, and sleep consistently, not just when something feels off. That's why I've been using IM8 Daily Essentials as part of my morning routine. It's a comprehensive formula with 92 nutrient-rich ingredients, including probiotics, prebiotics, and postbiotics to support the gut, alongside key vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants to help fill in the gaps of modern living. It's not a replacement for a balanced diet, but it's a really convenient way to help support your foundations daily, especially when life feels busy. If you're looking for something simple to support your mind, body, and gut, check out IM8 Daily Essentials. Use the code GUT360 for a special discount and free welcome kit on your first order. Now, Megan, we know that the gut and the brain are constantly communicating via the vagus nerve. But what a lot of people don't realize is that around 80% of that signaling is actually going up from the gut to the brain rather than the other way around, the brain talking down to the gut. So, what does that tell us about the potential role of gut dysfunction in things like anxiety, low mood, even longer term brain health?
Yeah, I mean, there is so much cool research coming out around this space, right? And
Yeah.
again, I think probably when we were both at uni, we got told, I certainly, back 20 years ago, got told that, if you wanted to improve someone's mental health, a lot of it was just medication, right? They're like, obviously food can help you, reduce your risk of colon cancer and some really, severe chronic conditions. But when it came to mental health, it was a little bit like, oh, let's not overstep our boundaries here. It's probably just a medical thing. So there was this amazing study, which came out in 2017 from some colleagues actually in Australia from the Smiles Institute, from the Mood and Food Institute, and the study was called the SMILES trial. And that was the first day that gave me kind of the confidence as a clinician to be like, whoa, actually, no. If I'm seeing someone in clinic who's really struggling with their mental health, obviously, medication might be one really important element for them, but diet can have clinically meaningful improvements in their mental health. So what they did is randomize half of the participants who had moderate severe depression to either a gut boosting diet, so very high in dietary fiber from whole plant sources, so very Mediterranean, right? And they're having the Super Six. And the other half got a befriending type of counseling. And they followed them for 12 weeks. And what they found in the diet group, um, over 30% of them had a significant improvement in their depression scores, which would have classified them as no longer clinically depressed. In the control group, that befriending counseling, it was only about 8%.
Wow.
So huge, right? Now, I always said
Amazing.
everyone stayed on their antidepressants. So they had moderate severe depression, right? So anyone listening to this, never go cold turkey on antidepressants. Of course, they're so important. But hopefully you see it as like an empowering way, as an additional therapy, or even before maybe you need to get to the stage of medications, looking at how you're feeding your gut microbiome. Actually, we've got some really powerful clinical research to suggest that could be a really helpful strategy to empower yourself with.
Wow, that's just unbelievable research. And I mean, it makes total sense. We all know just on a basic level, when we eat well, we feel better, right?
There was another really cool study. It was like in over 20,000 people, and they're all functional MRI studies. Essentially, they scanned people's brains, right, and looked at what they were eating. And they showed that people were having more, again, gut-loving Mediterranean diets, less ultra-processed foods, actually had bigger brains, and their brain connectivity was more functional, right? So that their brains were working better. And I think, that's such a cool one because it's very mechanistic, like actually scanning inside people's brain and correlating it with what they're eating. So that's a perfect example of, even if you're not struggling with, depression per se, if you just want to increase your mental performance, looking at what you're feeding your gut is actually a really important thing to do.
100%. I love that. If someone wanted to focus on just three things this month to genuinely support their gut, where would you tell them to start?
I would say add in that plant diversity. So think about the Super Six. Am I hitting it every day? I would say fermented foods. Again, there was a great study from Stanford University that showed that adding fermented foods into your diet not only increase that gut bacteria diversity, which again is what we're using as a marker of good gut health, but also reduced some markers of inflammation in the blood. So thinking about fermented foods, whether it's kefir, kimchi, live yogurt, those sorts of things is a really great one to add in. And then I think thinking about relaxing that gut-brain axis, because we know so many people struggle with gut issues, right?
Mm.
And there is a lot going on between that gut and the brain, as you highlighted. So relaxing this can actually have a really powerful impact on your gut. So, it might be something like having a worry diary, where if you are feeling super stressed, particularly before bed, right, then jotting everything down in your worry diary so it's kind of captured and releasing that from your brain. Because if you're keeping that in your head, what happens, that literally strangles your gut. No matter what you eat, it can trigger gut issues and makes your microbes kind of not relaxed and not happy, so to speak. So I'd say they are my top tips: having a worry diary, having your fermented foods, and getting something from the Super Six.
I love all of those. And I definitely think that the last one you said in particular about supporting that gut brain connection and, somewhere to offload your worries makes a huge difference. I see this with my clients all the time. Even with myself, I know for a fact that historically my Crohn's has always flared up during times of stressful life events. And, when everything is calm in life and in general, my gut is happier. I can say that with absolute conviction.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. Like, it is so powerful. And I think, that's why it really upsets me when a lot of these probiotic brands are taking, people's vulnerabilities and saying, well, we can cure everything with a probiotic. So again, when it comes to general gut health, do those 3 tips. Don't worry about taking a probiotic. Probiotics are very indication specific. So those 4 areas we spoke about, that might be a good reason if you want to support your immune system, you've got a new bub, you're on antibiotics, or you're vaginal, you've got vaginal imbalances, which actually interesting, 75% of women will have a vaginal imbalance at some point in their life, which is huge,
Wow.
right? And we don't speak about it. So those are the areas I would suggest to take on it.
Amazing. That is so helpful. Now, we finish each guest episode with a quick fire round. So, are you ready?
Love it. Yeah, bring it on.
What's something that seems healthy but often backfires for your health?
Oh, I love that one. I think at the moment I saw on this morning them talking about adding butter to your coffee, like
Uh,
that bullet tea. You remember that? It kind of went
Yeah.
vogue for a while, and I think sadly it's coming back. So it's been spoken about that it can help with your appetite regulation, make you feel fuller for longer, but don't go down there. If you want to have extra fats, have extra virgin olive oil. Loads of research that can be anti-inflammatory for the body.
Mhm. You don't have to put butter in your coffee. You can also, have a spoonful of peanut butter. That's probably what I would do.
Much tastier, right?
Absolutely. What is one healthy habit that people can start implementing today?
I would say add beans to your diet. I think so many people just don't even think about, your chickpeas, butter beans, which are literally a can, right? Like, it's so easy and actually makes your meals cheaper as well. Adding them to whatever, if you're having a stew, even add them to my pizzas sometimes. And I love that you add them to dips, right? They're so easy. And the studies suggest not only does it improve your gut health, the prebiotics that are naturally in them, but there's another study which showed that it can add an extra, I think, around 3 healthy years to your life by
How
adding them.
amazing is that? That's
Yeah,
crazy. Wow. Definitely having some beans for dinner tonight. What's your favorite gut-friendly food?
yeah. I mean, I would probably say kefir, because not only does it have those extra live microbes in it, but what happens, those microbes, when they take the cow's milk, you add the microbes to it, they start to break down some of the proteins in it, and they can become bioactive peptides, which are like kind of these active, chemicals. And there's studies to suggest that some of these can actually lower things like blood pressure. So there's so much going in fermented foods, and the bacteria are kind of not only, making these amazing chemicals, but also I think they enhance the flavor of the food. So I'm really pro
Yes,
fermented food, particularly kefir at the moment.
definitely. I'm really, really into sauerkraut and kimchi at the moment. I'm adding it to all my lunches and dinners, and I feel like it really just satisfies my taste buds so much. I love it.
Yeah, especially with eggs. I love kimchi with eggs. It's
It's
like
such a good combo. What's your go-to breakfast on busy days? I have an idea of what you're going to say, but go for it.
Bio me, my other baby that I created, because that exact reason, right? Like, obviously, if you're going to make everything from scratch at home, that's going to be your ideal. But who living a busy life has got time to make granola from scratch? So that's where, the idea of BioMe came to the forefront. So, each bowl we contain around 15 different plant points. And we've now got our kefir, yogurt, as well as our drinks. In fact, we've just launched our kefirs with a PhD. And I know you mentioned about grab your matcha, ladies. Well, actually, one of our flavors is matcha.
I love that.
So, yeah, definitely worth a try as well.
Amazing. I honestly love Bio and Me granola and also the overnight oats. So, so good.
Yeah, you're a winner.
What did you personally get wrong early in your career?
Oh, very, very good one. I think keeping to the science lab for too long, right? So I think I love the science side of things, but for too long, I kind of sat there just being really frustrated that it wasn't being translated, both to my patients, but also onto the retail shelves. So I saw that huge gap and I think I left it for too long. So I think that would be a mistake that I had this gut feeling for, about 5 or so years. And I probably should have acted that little bit faster on it. So I'd say that's probably my biggest mistake.
That's a good one. And what's one healthy habit you're still working on?
Oh, that work-life balance. I think when you're juggling a few different hats, obviously working at King's, got the gut health clinic, but then also have Smart Strains by me, plus have a family. That work-life balance is something that I struggle with all the time. So yeah,
You and the rest of us. Honestly, I think over half of my guests have said that.
yeah, I think this kind of work-life balance is often a myth. People say that they've nailed it. I'm like, how?
Amazing. Well, let's finish this round with a few fun ones. Coffee or matcha?
Coffee. I haven't gotten on board with a really strong matcha yet.
Favorite coffee shop?
There's a place that I used to live on Bermondsey Street called For Coffee. They had like the best coffee and muffins as well. Choc chip and raspberry was my favorite. So if you're in Bermondsey Street, central London, check them out.
It's a good rec. Overnight oats or eggs on toast?
Oh, that is a really hard one. So I would do overnight oats during the week and then eggs on toast to mix things up on the weekends.
Nice. I like that. If you could only do one type of exercise for the rest of your life, what would it be?
I'm a big HIIT addict. I just love that
Really?
adrenaline. It de-stresses me. Yeah, I usually do like 15 minutes end of day to unwind. Yeah, that's my thing.
Love that. And lastly, what is one word you associate with a healthy gut?
I would say at the moment it's a happy mind. Yeah, I think there's just
Amazing.
so much research coming out around those connections.
For sure. Thank you so much, Dr. Megan, for being a guest on the Gut 360 podcast. If someone wants to learn more about what you do, where is the best place for them to go?
They can check me out on social at The Gut Health Doctor or the website www.theguthealthdoctor.com for loads of free recipes and blogs and resources as well.
Brilliant. Thanks again, Megan, for your time. And thank you guys for listening to today's episode of the Gut 360 podcast. If you found this episode helpful, take a screenshot, share it on your Instagram story, and tag me at Ellie Breacher Nutrition and Megan at The Gut Health Doctor. I would love to reshare on my story. And let's be honest, we all know someone who struggles with their gut health. So send this podcast to them. It might just transform the way they approach gut health. Next week, I'm joined by Madeline Shaw for a really insightful conversation around a healthy summer glow up, realistic habits, glowing skin, and Madeline's motherhood journey. So make sure you're subscribed, and I'll be back in your ears next Monday.